Hey guys, how you doing? Hope you having good day. In this video, I am gonna talk about what if Deku had emerald eyes with a sleep-inducing quirk. Part 1. And subscribe for more, also like this video, that will be super duper awesome, helps me to stay motivate. And thanks to the author of the story, this video is possible. So do check it out and show some love. Name of this fanfic is Had Emerald Eyes by Unknowingly. So do check out the author of this story and check out entire work. Also, if you have any complaints about videos, feel free to comment, I will try to improve them. Let's jump in video. Mocking laughter surrounds him as he rushes out of Tua's classroom with burning eyes and hitching breaths. Deku had let slip about his quirklessness up until a little over a year ago, and it's like a flip had been switched. Before, his classmates and friends had been smiling with him and asking how he was, now they were smiling at him, all bared teeth and seething words. He had thought UA would be different. Thought that he could finally put his past behind him and find people he cared about who would care for him the same way. As he rushes down the empty school halls lost in thought, he doesn't see the person walking his way until he's already on the hard linoleum floor. Looking up to see All Might's face, he is overcome with relief knowing his mentor will always be there for him. "Ah, young Midoriya, I was just on my way to find you. I had something to talk to you about if you are free right now." The lanky man before him states before gesturing to an empty meeting room where they can talk privately. After they are both settled in the room, Izuku feels more at ease being away from prying eyes and in the presence of his role model and father figure. "So what was it you wanted to talk to me about, All Might? Is it about One for All?" Izuku ponders, wondering if there was new information his mentor found out about the ancient quirk. He seemed quite serious. "Yes, actually," he starts hesitantly, pausing before seemingly coming to a decision and continuing. "You've done wonderfully honing One for All so far, young Midoriya, but I'm afraid I must take it back." Everything seems to freeze for Izuku after that. All Might continues talking, but it sounds muffled to him, as though he were deep underwater. Cutting off whatever the hero is saying, Izuku looks up with blurry vision. "But I thought you said I was your successor, that I was doing well. Why take it back? Is it because I hurt myself so much when I first got it? If that's the case, then you don't have to worry. I've gotten it under control ever since my internship with Gran Torino and work studies. I'll try harder though, I promise." He pleads almost desperately, but the hero is already shaking his head. "No, my boy, it's not that. I've just decided that maybe I got a little ahead of myself when I offered the quirk to you in the first place, and that night I had been correct that young Mirio would be the perfect successor. I'm sure you understand." The greenette doesn't remember how the rest of the conversation went, only briefly acknowledging that he had agreed to meet All Might and the newly graduated blonde later that day to give away One for All. His quirk. He'd be quirkless again. He walks in a haze back to his dorm, ignoring the sneers coming from his classmates and whispering insults as he walks past the common room over to the elevator. It was just like he was back in middle school. He felt like a complete outcast, and not only that, but he would be quirkless just like he was back then. Does that mean he will have to drop out of the hero course and transfer to Gen Ed? Or were they going to kick him out of UA entirely? That couldn't happen. He was supposed to become a hero, how could he do that though if he's kicked out of school and loses his quirk? He doesn't even realize he's hyperventilating until he's knocked out of his thoughts by a loud banging on his door. "Deku? Get your ass out here." He covers his ears, trying to block out the continuous banging on his dorm door as tears stream down his face. "I swear to God, Deku. If you don't get your ass out of bed, I'll come in and drag you out kicking and screaming." Jolting awake in a cold sweat, Izuku throws his blankets off, trying to calm his breathing, and quickly rushes to his door, opening it to come face to face with an angry Kaken. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he misses the flash of concern that was gone before he could even look at the blonde's face. "You were supposed to meet me in the common room 20 minutes ago for our morning training, dipshit. Don't tell me you slept through your alarms again." Kaken deadpans while he watches Izuku head back into his room to check his phone, only to wince as he sees the time and that none of his aforementioned alarms went off. "Sorry, Kaken, I must have completely spaced yesterday before going to bed and didn't set my alarms." The greenette rubs sheepishly at his head when he catches the blonde's glare. "That's what you get for having such a shitty sleep schedule. Seriously, you need to stop working yourself to the bone and then staying up till ass o'clock in the morning. You're gonna work yourself into an early grave at this rate, nerd." Kaken scolds and Izuku has to fight a small smile from growing on his face at the volatile blonde's strange way of showing concern. They had grown a lot closer towards the end of their first year, and Izuku likes to think of them as close friends now in the beginning of their second year. Before Izuku can start apologizing again, the blonde turns and walks back down the hall. "Hurry and get changed, nerd, you're not getting out of sparing that easily. You have 10 minutes before I leave your ass behind and drag shitty hair with me instead." Tugging the rest of his water and whipping some sweat from his face with the edge of his shirt, Izuku joins Kaken in post-workout stretches. The familiar burn in his sore muscles leaves Izuku feeling satisfied in the best way. Hopefully, he'll get a better night's sleep compared to last night after such a good workout. He'll also have to make himself a cup of his favorite tea blend to help relax. So nerd, want to tell me what's going on with you? You look like someone kicked your cat this morning when you opened your door. Izuku glances over at Kaken as he switches to his right leg to grab at his toes, feeling his muscles burn with the stretch. I don't even have a cat, Kaken. He huffs at the glare he gets, knowing he can't get anything past the blonde since he knows him so well. It was nothing to worry about, Kaken, just a nightmare. I can't even remember it. That was a lie, he did remember it and it left him with a bitter feeling every time he thought about it, but the older teen didn't need to know that. Kaken scoffs at him before getting up to walk over to the things they left on a nearby bench. Izuku stood up and followed behind him. I wasn't worried, shithead. He grumbles with a slight blush on his cheeks and Izuku can't help the small giggle that escapes him. It's okay if you were Kaken, I think it's sweet. He teases, eyes alight with mischief as the explosive blonde scoffs and pushes his face away with a small chuckle. Stupid Deku. He hears his friend mutter with a fond eye roll and can't help but feel warm. If he had tried to tease Kaken like this even just a year ago, he'd have gotten an explosion to the face for sure, but they both have grown so much over their time spent at UA, their relationship has made leaps and bounds. When they get back to the dorms, Izuku hangs out in the common room with some of his friends and grabs some food before he decides to head up to his dorm and shower before doing his homework. Standing under the warm spray of the water, he lets his sore muscles relax while he thinks about the nightmare he had. It's not that it came completely out of nowhere. In fact, he'd say he gets nightmares like that more often than not. Sure, he'll occasionally dream about things like the USJ or the training camp from first year, but he thinks the one he had last night was more reoccurring than anything else because it's a deep-rooted fear he's had ever since he met All Might and received One for All. He knows it's irrational, his friends and mentor all care about him. It's just his stupid brain making up crazy scenarios to scare him. And that's all they are, scenarios, he knows this, and yet sometimes it works, sometimes he can't help to think that All Might will realize he had chosen wrong and he'll take his quirk back any day. That all of Izuku's hard work would be for nothing. He thinks all his friends will turn on him the second they get the chance. That he'll be kicked out of UA and forced to find something else to do with his life. Izuku quickly shakes his head, feeling guilty. No, he can't think like that. These are his friends he was thinking about. The only reason he is entertaining these kinds of thoughts has to be because he didn't get much sleep last night. That's it. He decides it would probably be best if he got a warm drink before taking a quick nap, then once he's rested up he can start his homework. After rinsing the suds from his body, the greenette turns the water off and wraps a towel around his waist before walking out into his room, the steam from the bathroom flowing in after him. He slips on some shorts and a hoodie before running the towel over his dripping hair to keep from getting his neck and hood all wet. Dropping the towel around his shoulders, Izuku heads down to the dorm's kitchen, planning to make some of his favorite tea blend that helps relax him. When he reaches into the cabinet it usually sits in, though he pulls out an empty box and frowns. Usually, he wouldn't care too much and just find something else to drink, but he was exhausted and just wanted the soothing drink and to lay in bed. Huffing, he tosses the empty box in the trash before going to grab his shoes and hunt down Izawa-sensei. He might as well go to the corner store nearby and replace it now before he forgets. Making sure to have a permission slip on hand, the greenette walks over to the teacher's lounge in hopes of finding his teacher. There are a couple of heroes sitting around the common room, grading papers or talking with each other, and he finds the dark hair of his sensei among them. As he walks further into the rooms he garners the attention of a couple of his teachers, waving politely but continuing to where Izawa was sitting talking with Mick-sensei, getting the blonde man's attention first. Hey little listener. The loud man greets with a smile which Izuku returns happily. Mick was one of his favorite teachers and he respected the man a lot. Hi Mick-sensei, hi Izawa-sensei. He greets them with a small smile before turning to Izawa. Problem child, he nods in greeting before continuing, eyeing the slight bags under the greenette's eyes. Did you need something? Izuku nods, handing the permission form over to his teacher and explains while the man reads over the paper. I was wondering if I could run to the corner store close by to pick up some more tea that I ran out of. He watches quietly as the teacher finishes skimming over the paper before nodding and signing off on the paper. Yeah, that should be fine, just come back right after. Izawa responds before clicking his pen shut and tucking it back in his pocket, looking up at the small teen in front of him. Just stay out of trouble, problem child. Izuku blushes and bows, of course, thank you sensei. He squeaks before turning and rushing back outside towards the main entrance, missing the amused looks his two teachers shot each other. Adding his pockets to make sure he had his wallet and phone, Izuku makes his way down the sidewalk towards the store. He wanted to make this quick so he could finally take a nap, and it would suck if he had to turn around because he forgot money. Walking into the cool air conditioning of the store, briefly thinking he was glad to be wearing a hoodie, he makes a beeline for the aisle that stores all the teas, ignoring all the other shoppers. Yawning into his hand, Izuku scans all the different tea blends before finding the pastel-colored box that his favorite tea comes in. Reaching up to grab it off the shelf, Izuku doesn't expect someone to be right behind him when he turns around, so he ends up dropping the box, startled. "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize someone was behind me." He quickly apologizes as he bends down to grab the box he just dropped before awkwardly rubbing his neck when the stranger just stares at him without saying anything. He had a dark cap covering his dark hair, but Izuku could make out the dark red almost black color, and when he looked at his face, could see dark bags under similarly colored eyes. The stranger had on dark clothes, but Izuku could make out a dark leather tail with a spade shape at the tip hanging behind the man. He awkwardly clears his throat before giving a small shaky smile as he slowly backs up, making eye contact for a couple of seconds before averting his eyes when he feels a weird dizziness wash over him. "Sorry again, sir." He mumbles again before scurrying away, feeling a pair of eyes follow him up until he gets up to the cash register to pay. Breathing a small sigh of relief, Izuku pays before thanking the cashier and walking through the door, heading back to UA. By the time he's made it back into the dorms after letting Izawa-sensei know he got back okay, he's almost completely forgotten the strange interaction. Checking the time, he sees there is still a couple of hours before dinner, so he decides to just do his homework instead of taking that nap he had planned on. Even if he is super tired, he can just go to bed early tonight. He's sure his friends will understand if he doesn't stay up like he usually does. Maybe Kaken made a good point earlier. Izuku finished up most of his homework halfway through an English assignment that wasn't due until later in the week before deciding to just finish what was left of it the next day after class when his eyelids weren't drooping with every other word. He puts all his stuff back into his bag and checks the time. Just a little past 6, so that meant everyone would be gathering in the common rooms for dinner right about now. The teen stretches his arms over his head with a groan before deciding to go down and wait for dinner with everyone else. Rubbing his eyes, the greenette walks down the hall towards the elevator, yawning while he waits for the doors to open. He's greeted with bickering when the doors open, and when he sees Kaken and Todoroki standing there, he lets a small smile form on his face at his two closest friends. "Hi, Kaken, Todoroki." He mumbles around another yawn as he steps in beside the two taller teens. "Hello Midoriya, I haven't seen you much today, have you been busy?" His bicolored friend greets him while Kaken just ruffles his hair in lieu of an actual greeting. He swatting the blonde's hand away, pouting at the smirk he gets in response before turning to the other teen. "Not really, I did go to the store earlier today to get more of that tea I like, then I just did homework after that." He responds and they continue quietly conversing while they walk out of the elevator, heading over to the common room where he can hear his classmates chatter. He sits with his friends and occasionally interjects in the conversation, but otherwise just contentedly listens. And when dinner is ready, he sits with his class happily engaging in conversations they pull him into, but not starting any himself, too tired to talk when he doesn't have to. If they ask about his quietness, he just laughs it off and tells them he's a bit tired. When dinner is all done and everything is cleaned up, Izuku makes himself a cup of tea, relieved to finally be able to relax and lay down in bed. "Deku, we were going to watch a movie, do you want to join us?" He hears Uraraka's voice and turns to see her peeking into the kitchen with a smile on her face. He feels a little guilty to turn her down, but he's kicked, ready to call it a day. "Sorry Uraraka, not tonight, I was planning on heading in early, maybe next time though." He smiles at her as he stirs a bit of honey in his tea. "Alright, next time then. Sleep well Deku." She replies cheerily, giving him a thumbs up before heading back out to the common room. After he's satisfied with his tea, he takes it up to his room, wishing everyone a good night as he passes them in the common room. He flips off his main light, letting the desk lamp dimly light his room as he settles into bed, deciding to read while he drinks his tea. Pulling out a book he borrowed from Izawa-sensei, he sets in for a quiet night. Sipping his tea as he reads the small print relaxes the teen, letting his mind go quiet. Finishing up his tea, the teen then marks the page he's on as he can't keep his eyes open any longer. The greenette sets the book and his cup on his desk before turning his lamp off, getting comfortable under his covers and closing his eyes with a quiet sigh. Turning over with a groan for what felt like the 100th time that night, Izuku snaps his tired and irritated eyes open to check the time on the small bedside clock he has. Reading the mocking numbers that inform him the time is 1:30, he sighs an irritated sound before flopping back in his bed, willing sleep to come to him as he squeezes his eyes shut. He thought after being tired all day and then how relaxed he felt before going to bed that he'd fall asleep easily, but not only did it take hours for him to fall asleep, but he hadn't been able to stay that way for more than an hour without waking back up in a cold sweat or gasping for breath. He kept getting stupid nightmares which he didn't understand. He hasn't ever had this kind of problem. Usually if, and that's a big if, nightmares plague his sleep, he never gets them this often in one night, let alone multiple times a week. He had one the night before and usually, he wouldn't get another one for at least a couple more weeks, but now he can't even sleep through one night without getting one. He grits his teeth, annoyed when he feels the familiar burn behind his eyes that promises tears. As frustrated tears stream down his face he can't help but curse his stupid brain. Why couldn't it just shut up for once so he could get some sleep? He had class in the morning and really did not want to go with little to no sleep. He's done it once or twice after pulling an all-nighter and everyone told him never to do it again, saying how a sleep-deprived Izuku was scary, whatever that means. He glances at the clock again and a small whimper escapes his throat. It's like the clock was broken because he couldn't have possibly been lying there for another hour and a half when it only felt like a few minutes. He was so tired. After only getting around 5 hours of sleep the night before and constantly waking up before he could get any rest now, he felt more tired than he thought he ever had before, and that's not even taking into account what he does during the day, like training, that wears him out. After around another 30 minutes when the clock reads 3:30, he's able to fall into another fit of restless sleep before he wakes up with a jolt, the nightmare fading from his memory before he even has time to process. Glancing at the clock with a pitiful groan he sees it's around 4:30 in the morning and realizes he was only asleep for another hour before waking up again. He decides to just get up for the day, not wanting to deal with the same stupid nightmares that he forgets the second he's conscious. Stumbling to his bathroom and flipping the light switch, he winces at the bright light burning his sensitive eyes. After a second for his eyes to adjust to the sudden lighting, the greenette glances into the mirror and grimaces at his reflection. His hair is a wild mess from all his tossing and turning, sleep shirt is all wrinkled and sticking to his sweaty skin. His eyes are bloodshot red with dark bags under them. He sighs before turning the shower on, hoping it'll wake him up a bit. Stripping down and stepping under the cool stream of water shocks the greenette as goosebumps rise over his skin, but he soon relaxes into the familiar motions of cleaning himself. Running his shampoo through his soaking hair and washing his body clean of his long night. When Izuku steps out of the shower, toweling himself dry, he's glad to feel himself more awake after the cold shower. He dresses himself before heading down to the quiet common rooms. Everyone was still asleep, the early risers of the class were not due to be up until around 5 for their early morning routines. The tired teen walks into the kitchen to start up a pot of coffee, hoping to keep himself energized for his upcoming classes. When the dark liquid finishes brewing he pours himself a cup before going to sit on one of the common room couches. Green eyes stare out the large windows, watching the sun rise, and when his classmates start waking and trickling into the kitchen, he greets them quietly. Izuku doesn't notice the approaching footsteps, too busy staring blankly at the wall, so when he feels the couch dip next to him and something nudges his leg, he jumps slightly before turning to see Kaken staring at him. The blonde has always been more of a morning person compared to Izuku, but he can't help but feel a little jealous of how put together and much more awake he looks compared to himself. "You good nerd. You were kinda just staring at the wall over there," Kaken says as he studies the greenette. He smiles slightly at his friend before going to take a sip of his coffee, only to frown when he finds it empty. "Yeah, I'm fine, Kaken, just got up earlier than I usually do." It's not exactly a lie, but not the full truth either. He doesn't want to worry the blonde over something so trivial when he can just catch up on his sleep after class. Getting up to go refill his coffee he can hear the taller teen follow him based on the disbelieving scoff and footsteps that trail after him. Thankfully Kaken doesn't push it further and they both move around the kitchen in companionable silence. Izuku makes some more coffee and Kaken starts breakfast for himself. The greenette watches the blonde move around the kitchen with tired eyes from his perch on the counter as he sips at his fresh coffee. He blinks in surprise when Kaken sets a plate of food in front of him before looking up in confusion. "Don't look at me like that, nerd." The blonde gruffs before taking the seat next to him and starting to eat his own plate of food. He hums quietly before setting his cup down and picking up the fork to start eating. "Thanks," Kaken the greenette mumbles around his food. Izuku thinks he did a pretty good job keeping up with his morning classes, considering how tired he was. Sure, there were a couple of times that he'd catch his friends shooting him concerned glances or when some of his teachers had to call his name multiple times to get his attention. But all in all, he thought it was going pretty well. That was until after lunch when they had heroics class and he felt and probably looked with how he was dragging his feet like the Walking Dead. They were doing quirkless sparring right now, which he usually was one of the top in his class, but after the 5th time of getting knocked off his feet and pinned in the past 10 minutes, he was starting to get frustrated. Gritting his teeth, the greenette gets back to his feet and ignores the concerned glance his sparring partner, Kirishima, shoots him. Again. Getting into a fighting stance, Izuku looks towards the redhead, giving him a sharp glare when the teen just stands there. Come on, he tries again and huffs when the other hesitantly gets into a ready stance. Going on the offensive, trying to catch him by surprise, he gets a few good hits in before he reacts too slowly to a feint and leg sweep and gets knocked down again, the air getting knocked out of him, leaving him gasping for breath. Shit, sorry man, I thought you would have dodged that. Kirishima rushes over to help him up with an apologetic frown. Still gasping for air, trying to calm down with deep breaths that fail a few times, he stands on shaky legs before going back to his side of the mat and getting into a ready stance. Again. He rasps, but before Kirishima can protest, a hand is placed on his shoulder. Looking up, he meets eyes with Aizawa-sensei's dark ones. That's enough problem, child, go take a breather and get some water. Izuku opens his mouth to protest before grumbling at the glare he's given and walks to where he set his water bottle at the beginning of class. He would never admit it, but he really did need a break. He gulps some water down while looking out at the rest of the class continuing their spars. The frustrated teen kicks himself for his performance in class so far, even if he knows logically that it's not because he is falling behind, but just because he hasn't been getting sleep. Want to tell me what's going on, problem child? Aizawa asks as he leans against a wall, watching the class just like Izuku had been a moment ago. I don't know what you're talking about. He feigns ignorance to try and buy time for an excuse, knowing his sensei will see right through it, and with a quick side glance at the older male, he knows he didn't fool his teacher one bit. With a tired sigh, the greenette rubs his sore eyes before looking back at the class. It's nothing really, just had a hard time sleeping last night is all. He can feel his teacher's eyes boring into the side of his head, trying to find any lies. It's not like it was a lie though, he did have a hard time sleeping last night due to nightmares. He just didn't tell his teacher that the same thing happened the night before as well, so he's only running on about 8 hours of sleep within the last 48 hours. There's a quiet sigh beside him before he sees his teacher nod in his peripheral vision. Alright kid, just try to take it easy and get some rest tonight. He finally replies and Izuku nods, fully planning to do exactly that before heading back over to Kirishima and continuing their previous sparring. By the time class let out, Izuku couldn't wait to collapse in his bed. He had been able to win a couple of spars, but nothing compared to what he usually could. Ignoring the concerned glances he can feel his friend sending him, Izuku heads straight to his room, not even bothering to change before collapsing into his bed. He lays there with his eyes closed, listening to his quiet breathing as he waits for his exhaustion to kick in and for him to finally be able to get some sleep. After a good 30 minutes of quietly laying there, Izuku blessedly feels sleep wash over him. He thinks that's the end of it and he'll be able to wake up feeling well rested, but when he comes to, screaming and sweating, he can't help the exhausted sob that racks his body as he buries his face in his hands. He's exhausted but he can't stay asleep. Flashes of the nightmare he just woke from flash behind his eyes and he wishes he could forget what he had seen just like he had with all the others. Izuku sits around the dining table with his classmates, staring down at his almost full plate with tired eyes. After he had calmed down earlier he had forgone going back to sleep, deciding to distract himself until dinner with his English homework that he never finished. The teen will admit that it's probably not his best work, but he was too tired to redo it. Hopefully, Mick-sensei won't notice when he turns it in tomorrow during class. He's listening to the scraping of dishes and chatter going on around him as he pushes his food around with his fork when he feels a nudge to his foot. Furrowing his brows he looks in the direction it came from and catches the intense gaze of ruby eyes. He stares back with lazy green eyes and can almost hear the questions from here. The greenette musters his best reassuring smile he can before going back to his food. Quickly finishing as much of his dinner as he can, Izuku quietly excuses himself before heading to the kitchen so he can clear his plate. Running his dishes under the hot water of the sink, he looks up when a hand places a plate on the counter next to him, not surprised to see Kaken standing there. The hell is up with you, Deku, you look like shit. Ruby eyes stare into emerald before the shorter teen looks back at the steaming water his hands are growing red under. Snorting, Izuku turns the water off and pats his hands dry on his shorts before turning to face his friend. Thanks, Kaken, I feel like shit too, what gave it away? He drawls sarcastically with a huff. Not waiting for a response from the bewildered teen, the green-haired boy spins on his heels and heads towards the elevator, fully planning to try and sleep again, even if he's had no luck with it the past 2 days. When he is up in his room getting ready for bed, an idea pops in his head and he wanders to the communal bathrooms, searching the medicine cabinets for the melatonin he knows Hitachi keeps in here when his insomnia acts up. He makes a triumphant sort of noise when he finds them and reads the back of the bottle before popping two in his mouth and heading back to his room to read until it kicks in. Even with his sore eyes, the teen still picks up his book from the night before and reads for about 30 minutes before he feels the effects of the melatonin kicking in. With heavy eyes, Izuku flicks his lamp off and lets himself relax, his eyes slipping shut with a content smile on his face. Izuku can't decide if he wants to cry, scream, punch something, or all of the above. He knows he should have fallen asleep by now. He is beyond exhausted, running on barely any sleep within the past 3 days. He thought the melatonin would have helped, it should have helped, but as he stares at the clock reading 4:15 and blinking red lights, he thinks something might be wrong with him because he can't sleep. It's not even that he keeps waking up from nightmares anymore, because that can't happen unless he's asleep, and he hasn't slept a wink since yesterday after class when he woke up screaming. Sitting up from his bed causes the blanket that had been covering him to slip down to his lap, leaving the chilly air to bite at his warm skin. He rubs his eyes trying to alleviate the dryness, but ultimately fails. Swallowing the lump in his throat trying to push back his tears, he heads to his bathroom. Staring at his reflection blankly, Izuku is left feeling hopeless. It felt like he'd never get any sleep again. After the sun has long since risen and he's sitting in class listening to Samantha-sensei drone on about history, resting his head against the cool surface of his desk, Izuku tries to think of the reason he can't sleep. Obviously, he's been having nightmares, but other than the occasional one he gets about every month or so, they aren't ever a problem like this. At first, he thought it could be a stress factor. Maybe he had been stressed and that was the cause of all the nightmares he's been getting. It would explain why he forgets them the second he wakes up because there isn't any meaning to them. But that wouldn't make sense because as far as he's aware the only thing stressing him out is the nightmares and lack of sleep, so stress isn't the cause he doesn't think. But if it isn't that, he really can't pinpoint the reason for all of this, he isn't a medical professional and he doesn't know what causes these kinds of problems. He tells himself that if he can't sleep at all tonight, then he'll go see Recovery Girl, even if he has to deal with the old woman scolding. The greenette is jolted from his thoughts and shoots his head up when the loud yell of "Present Mick starting class" greets his ears. He hadn't even realized history was over and Cementis had left. The first thing his blonde English teacher starts with is asking them to hand in the English assignment he had finished the day before. So digging that out of his bag, he passes it up towards the front where it'll be collected. Then he pulls the assigned book they've been reading out and settles in for a long period. He usually would look forward to the more upbeat class, but he hadn't gotten any sleep and he didn't have the energy. At some point, his head ended up back on his desk with his book lying next to him. He had tried to at least pretend to pay attention, but his whole body felt heavy and he was starting to get a headache. He listens to the excitable teacher read, occasionally pausing to answer a question someone might have, before jolting and turning his head to see a paper had been slipped on his desk and his teacher retreating towards his desk. "Alright little listeners, I want you all to finish reading the next chapter yourself before filling out the worksheet that goes with it, you dig?" Shooting the class with a pair of finger guns, the hero sits at his desk before pulling some papers to grade while the class reads to themselves. Izuku looks over the note on his desk, gulping when he sees Mick-sensei had asked him to stay after class to chat about something. Glancing up to try and gauge if he's in trouble based on his teacher's mood, his green eyes meet the concerned ones of his teachers before looking back down at his desk. Instead of giving in and laying his head back down, Izuku grabs his book and tries to power through his exhaustion. He's able to read the first couple paragraphs of the chapter the class was currently on before the lines start blurring together and his eyes go out of focus. He shakes his head, bringing a hand up to roughly rub at his eyes before looking back at his book and reading for another couple of minutes before he finds himself just staring at a spot on the book, once again losing focus. Frustrated, he huffs out a sigh before opting to just look out the window, that way he doesn't look like he's sleeping in class, even though hadn't been before, but he can still rest his head on his palm. When class finally ends and his classmates head out of the room for lunch, Izuku waves off his friends who are waiting for him before slowly walking over to Mick-sensei's desk and clearing his throat to get his teacher's attention. "You wanted to see me, sir?" The teen asks nervously while he watches the man in front of him push aside the papers he is grading to give his full attention to the student. Mick gives him a reassuring smile before speaking. "No need to worry little listener, you're not in trouble. I just had a few concerns I wanted to address." The blonde trails off as he digs through the stack of papers he was grading before seeming to find what he was looking for. "Firstly, I just wanted to ask how you were doing. I couldn't help but notice you seemed a bit tired during class." Izuku sweat drops. Of course, his teacher had noticed, not only could Izuku practically feel the eye bags he was sporting, but he also had been acting completely different all day, compared to how he usually does. Oh yeah, sorry about that sensei. I'm just a bit tired. He mumbles, biting back a grimace at his teacher's disbelieving hum. Alright, that leads to my next question. While I was grading your paper I noticed towards the end that it wasn't as detailed as all your other work. Normally that wouldn't cause for question, but knowing you, you always write as much as you can to get your points across, and it made me worry a bit to see that change. I won't mark any points off, but I am curious as to what might be the cause of this. The teacher explains not unkindly and Izuku curses himself. He knew Mick would notice, he should have redone it, no matter how tired he was. The greenette feels his neck and face heat up in embarrassment as tears well in his eyes. He briefly sees a look of shock on his teacher's face before he buries the heel of his palms into his eyes, trying to fend off the wave of tears that are threatening to leak down his face. Hey, it's alright little listener, you aren't in any trouble, here take a seat. He hears his teacher say softly before a hand on his back leads him around the large desk and into the cushioned desk chair. With a sniffle, the tired teen rubs his eyes, wiping the dampness away from them before looking up into the kind eyes in front of him. Sorry sensei, I didn't mean to cry like that. Izuku whispers, slightly mortified about crying in front of the man, but his teacher is already shaking his head. There's no need to apologize, sometimes we can't help things like that. The blonde smiles as he places a hand on the teen's shoulder and gives a comforting squeeze. You know you can always talk to me if you need to, little listener. His teacher offers and Izuku gives him a nod but keeps his mouth shut. With an almost unnoticeable sigh, Mick stands back up from his crouch and offers one last comforting smile before letting Izuku leave. When he's grabbed his stuff and is just about to leave the room, his teacher's voice makes him turn around. My door is always open if you need anything kiddo. Izuku gives a small smile and thanks him before stumbling out of the class and heading outside to sit under a tree, opting to skip out on the loud lunchroom and eat later, he's not very hungry now anyway. Hizashi likes to think he's a pretty observant person. After all, years of being a pro-hero kind of makes it hard not to be. So when he notices a certain green-haired child who's usually very active during class slumped over on his desk and seemingly having a hard time staying awake, he thinks there's good reason to be a little worried. And when he starts grading the class's English papers and comes across Midoriya's thinking it'll be a breeze going through it as the kid is top of his class and always goes above and beyond on his work, he knows something must be going on when towards the end of it, he seemed to stop trying. After a year and a half of knowing the kid and grading all his papers, Hizashi thinks he knows him well enough to know that the teen would never turn anything in unless it had been triple checked and cited. It's not that he did a bad job on the assignment either, just not his best. Usually, he wouldn't worry too much as all of his students have turned in something that wasn't their best work, but this along with the way the teen had acted during class raises a few red flags in his opinion. He decides to just ask about it after class and see if anything is going on. If not and the teen is just having an off day, then Hizashi will admit he was wrong and move on. Sitting in the teacher's lounge now though, the blonde isn't sure what to think. When Midoriya had calmed down and left the classroom, Hizashi had gathered up his things before coming here to think about the whole interaction. The kid had looked exhausted and when he broke down for a second over the homework, Hizashi promised himself to get to the bottom of this. Something was going on with his student and he had to help. What's got you so deep in thought there, Hizashi? The deep voice of his husband sounds in his ears and the blonde turns to see the tired man walking into the teacher's lounge and sitting down, leaning up against his side. I was just thinking about Midoriya, did you notice anything unusual with him? He questions his lover as he shifts his papers over to the coffee table before pulling the ravinette closer to him. He gives a hum of acknowledgement as he seems to think for a moment. Hizashi waits patiently, running his fingers through the long black hair. Yeah, actually he seemed oddly tired and didn't really interact with his friends at all today during homeroom, only giving small nods or hums which I thought was strange. He also seemed to be struggling during heroics yesterday. I had to make him take a break when I noticed how hard he was pushing himself. Shouta finally answers and Hizashi is already nodding along. That is strange, you guys were doing quirkless sparring right? He's usually pretty good with that. And the same happened in my class today too, but when I asked about some things after class he had a small breakdown. The blonde murmurs before looking down at his husband. Would you be able to talk to him, see if he tells you anything? I think he might trust you more. The underground gave him a disbelieving look before huffing and looking away. I'm not so sure about that, but yeah I'll see if I can get anything out of the kid tomorrow before homeroom. He murmurs and Hizashi squeezes him in thanks before reaching forward to grab his papers again wanting to get his grading done before his shift at the radio station later today. Izuku sits upright in his bed staring into the dark corner of his room. After class, he decided to go on a jog to get rid of his nervous energy, even if he was already so exhausted he just wanted to lay down. He skipped dinner completely and he's been in his room ever since he got back. If his clock is correct then it's just past 2 a.m. and he's been up the entire night. He had thought he heard something from the corner of his room, which is why he was staring, but he couldn't see anything. He feels like he's going crazy sitting here in the dark, so with a tired sigh, he wraps his blanket around his shoulders before heading down to the common rooms. Sitting on the couch with a freshly brewed cup of tea in his hands, Izuku lets the tears he's been holding all day flow freely in the darkness of the common rooms. He didn't know what to do. No matter how hard he tried he couldn't go to sleep, he would rather take the nightmares over this because at least then he would be getting some sleep. He doesn't hear the dorm doors open, nor does he hear the almost silent footsteps walking towards him until he's spilling his lukewarm tea all over his hands and a little on his lap at the quiet voice of his sensei. "Sorry problem child, I didn't mean to scare you, but can I ask what you're doing up at almost 2:30 in the morning?" Aizawa questions quietly as he takes a seat handing Izuku a handkerchief, blessedly ignoring Izuku's weak attempts at trying to wipe away his tears. With a sniffle, Izuku sets his now almost empty cup on the coffee table and wipes away the liquid from his hands and lap as best he can before fidgeting with a piece of cloth. Sensei, I think something is wrong with me." The greenette mumbles with a wobble to his voice as he looks up at his homeroom teacher with helpless eyes. The man seems surprised by his response, clearing his throat. "What makes you say that, kid?" Shouda hadn't expected to see anyone up when he got back from patrol, so it's safe to say he was surprised to see his problem child seemingly in tears on one of the common room couches. He quietly approaches the distressed kid, clearing his throat a little to get the boy's attention, only to wince when he practically jumps out of his skin, effectively spilling whatever he had in his cup. Offering a handkerchief with a quick apology, Shouda sits next to the greenette in hopes of figuring out what he's doing up so late. What he doesn't expect is the kid's response to his question. Sensei, I think something is wrong with me." At first, the man thought the kid was talking down on himself. He is known for being self-sacrificial, and Shouda wouldn't be surprised if that correlated with low self-esteem and a confidence problem, but when he looks into those watery emerald eyes and sees a familiar hopelessness he didn't want to see in any of his student. He thinks it might be a bit deeper than the kid needing a confidence boost. "What makes you say that, kid?" the underground hero asks after clearing his throat. He watches as multiple emotions flash through the kid's eyes. He seems to be debating if he should tell Shouda whatever is on his mind before giving himself a small nod and making eye contact with him. "I can't sleep, sensei. At first I thought it was just nightmares causing it because I kept getting them more than usual, but I haven't been able to fall asleep since Monday when I took a short nap after heroics class." Shouda almost can't believe the words coming out of the kid's mouth. That was almost 3 days ago. "Jesus kid, no wonder you look exhausted. When was the last time you got a full night's sleep?" He has to know, even with the amount of time the kid has been awake isn't healthy for anyone, but if it's been longer than that he has to know so he can help the greenette to the best of his ability. Midoriya seems to think about it, muttering under his breath, and Shouda's blood runs a bit cold at some of the words he hears. "Well, I had those nightmares all night on Sunday, which is why I was so tired during training. And I also had the one the night before which was on Saturday night and I think I only got like 4.5 to 5 hours of sleep then so it was probably Friday that I actually had an entire night of uninterrupted sleep." The kid keeps mumbling some more before looking up to give Shouda his answer, but what he just heard was answer enough. "It was probably Friday, sensei. Saturday and Sunday I kept waking up and didn't get much sleep and then you already know about Monday and tonight." The teen mumbles, his words slurring together slightly before trailing off and looking at him with misty eyes. "I'm so tired, sensei. I just want to sleep, but I can't and I don't know what to do." The kid's voice breaks as he starts to cry again and Shouda can't help but pull the kid into his arms and let him cry it out, trying to give as much comfort as he can. After around 30 minutes of rocking the boy back and forth, whispering comforting words and running his fingers through thick curls, Midoriya finally calms enough to pull away. "I think you might be under the effects of a quirk, Midoriya. You should have been able to fall asleep by now, even if that meant passing out in exhaustion. But you said you haven't been able to sleep at all, no matter how tired you are, and what about those nightmares you mentioned? Are those something you get often or are they new?" If they were a reoccurring thing Shouda will have to see about having him attend a couple sessions with Inui, but if they are newer, then it's something they can work with to find out who did this. Green eyes meet his, and Shouda can't see that hopelessness from earlier drain just slightly from the kid's eyes. "Well, I do sometimes get nightmares only about once every 1 or 2 months, and after I wake up from it, I'm always able to go back to sleep pretty easily. I also always remember those. But the ones I had been getting on Sunday were never ending, it felt like." I had a hard time falling asleep, and when I finally did I would wake up not even an hour later, only to forget what they had been about. Although that might not mean anything really considering the one I had on Monday after class. The teen tells him, mumbling the last bit, but Shouta catches it anyway. It might not mean anything like the kid had said, but Shouta makes sure to remember that detail just in case it ends up being something in the future. Okay, thank you for telling me, problem child. We'll figure this out, I promise. Pulling out his phone, he sends a message to Nezu so he can start looking into this while Shouta figures out everything he can from the Viridian boy. But first, before asking the boy any more questions at the moment, he needs to find a way for this kid to get some sleep, so he contacts one of his closest friends, Namuri, despite the late hour to meet in Recovery Girl's office. Alright kid, he starts after slipping his phone back in his pocket and looking back at the exhausted teen who had been silently leaning against his side. I sent a message over to Nezu so we can start trying to find out when you got hit with a quirk and who did it. The greenette gives him a thankful look before startling slightly when Shouta gets up with a huff and motions for him to follow. Where are we going, sensei? The kid nervously trails after him, and when Shouta glances back he sees him twisting his scarred fingers together in a sort of nervous tick. Recovery Girl's office, we're going to try and figure out a way to get you to sleep tonight so you aren't so exhausted tomorrow when we ask you more questions. The underground hero answers as they both continue down the path toward the main campus. Izuku wasn't so sure how well this would work. Laying in one of the beds Recovery Girl has in the infirmary, he looks around at the adults in the room with him. Aizawa-sensei had messaged one of his other teachers, Midnight, to try and use her quirk on him, so she was here along with the other two heroes. Are we sure this is going to work? I've already tried things like melatonin and herbal tea. Truth be told, he was nervous. If this didn't work then he didn't know what would. We aren't sure, but it's worth a try. If it does then it's a temporary solution until we can stop the quirk that's causing this. His sensei drones, and so figuring there isn't much on the line other than the knowledge that if this fails, he doesn't know when the next time he will be able to sleep will be. He relaxes into the pillows behind him and gives a short nod. Midnight steps forward with a kind smile while the other two adults stand back to avoid breathing her quirk in. Just try to relax, kiddo. She murmurs before lifting one of her sleeves and releasing her quirk around the boy. The sweet scent is nice, and when he feels his eyes droop before shutting completely, he can't help but feel relief. Right as he's about to lose consciousness completely, however, Izuku feels something he can only describe as a wall blocking him from sleep. With a jolt, his eyes snap back open, and when he looks around at his teachers seeing frowns on their faces, he doesn't hold back the broken sob that forces its way out of him. It feels like that's all he's able to do now, trying to sleep only to not come out successful, and then cry when he realizes how tired he feels. With his face buried in his hands, he doesn't notice Aizawa coming to sit next to him until he's pulling him into a hug, comforting him much like he did earlier that night. When he feels those strong arms around him, he lets himself fall apart in the safety of his teacher's presence. He hadn't noticed he was mumbling the same things over and over again until he heard the man holding him shush and reassure him as best he could at that moment. Please, I'm so tired, make it stop, I just want to sleep, please. He sobs, choking on and slurring his words together while he grips the back of his teacher's hero costume. As he listens to his teacher's mantra of, "It's okay and I've got you," promising that they will fix this soon, Izuku thinks, in that moment, that he would do just about anything to get even just a little bit of sleep. Izuku is dismissed from class the next day. At first, he had tried to deny it and say he was fine to go, he didn't want to fall behind after all, but Aizawa had shut that down quickly, and who was Izuku to argue with his teacher? He was secretly glad Aizawa wouldn't let him go because he was having a hard time putting coherent sentences together, so even if he had gone to class, it would ultimately be pretty useless, and he would just be exhausting himself unnecessarily trying to act okay. Sitting here in front of Principal Nezu and the detective he has come to be familiar with throughout his time at UA, he racks his brain for any helpful information he might have for them, but comes up empty-handed. They had asked if he noticed anything weird or suspicious in the past couple of days before he had noticed the effects of the quirk. "I'm sorry, I can't think of anything that was out of the ordinary." He starts before a light bulb goes off in his head. He had gone to the corner store Saturday to get some more of that tea, but he doesn't really think anything could have happened. "Well, actually I did go to the corner store on Saturday to get something, but nothing really happened there. All I did was get some tea and then leave." Aizawa hummed from his spot leaning against the wall. "Yes, I remember that, you hadn't been gone for long and reported back to me when you returned to campus. Did you run into anyone that could have been suspicious or did anything stand out to you?" Izuku watches Tsukauchi scribble something down into his notepad while Nezu seems to type something into his computer. He thinks back to when he had gone to the store almost a week ago and feels frustrated when he has trouble remembering due to his mind being all foggy from not sleeping. It seemed like any other shopping trip he goes on, he had walked in and gone straight to where he knew the tea he liked was kept. But when he thinks a bit harder, it comes back to him, he remembers briefly bumping into a man in a cap and thinking he had seemed a bit strange when he didn't acknowledge Izuku other than staring at him. He mentions it as such. Can you describe what the man looked like at all? The detective asks him after a brief pause while he is writing down what Izuku had said. Now that the interaction had resurfaced in his mind, the greenette could remember taking in what he could of the stranger's appearance. I remember I had first noticed a dark cap he had been wearing that covered a majority of his face, but his hair was a dark red almost black color, same with his eyes. He also looked really tired with bags under his eyes. Oh, he also had some kind of mutation, I noticed some kind of tail, but it looked more like a tail you'd associate with a classic demon or devil look compared to an animal mutation. He pauses when Nezu claps his paws together. It seems you would be correct, Midoriya. I was able to pull up the security cameras in the store you had gone to, and though during the interaction between the two of you, most of his appearance is not visible, if I skip ahead a bit there is a brief moment where the camera caught his face. Green eyes widened in surprise that the principal had gotten that so quickly. Though really he shouldn't be surprised, he is Nezu after all. So you'll be able to find him? Will I be able to sleep again? He asks in a quite hopeful voice, and the Chimera's eyes soften as much as they can. You've no need to worry, Midoriya, I'm already sending this over to the detective so that we can start facial readings to find out the man's quirk and track him down. The furry paw pats Izuku's hand and the boy lets a few tears slip from his eyes before he's thanking the adults profusely. No need for that, why don't you head back to the dorms and try to relax and I'll send someone to come find you the moment we get any news. Nezu offers and Izuku nods, standing and bowing to the three adults with another thanks before walking out of the giant doors and down the school halls. There's still some time before classes are released for lunch, so Izuku hurries to not get caught up in the soon-to-be crowded halls. The teen grabs a small snack from the dorm kitchen before heading back to his room, he hadn't had much of an appetite for the past 2 days. Stepping into his dark room, the only light filtering through a crack in his curtains, he flops down onto his bed with a jaw-cracking yawn. He winces and rubs at his jaw before dropping his arm over his sore eyes. With all the crying he's done within the past day piled on top of zero sleep, his eyes feel like they are burning and he can't stop blinking and rubbing at them, trying to alleviate the pain. He jumps when he feels something brush against his leg. The greenette rubbed at his shin and looked around his sheets to see if a bug had gotten in his room, but saw nothing. With a sigh, he flops back down and opens his laptop to put on a random movie or something for background noise. Leaning back into his pillows he slowly snacks on the granola bar he had brought up with him while he watches random videos he finds online. Yawning periodically while watching the compilation video of cats he found on his recommended page makes the greenette laugh quietly. Halfway through another yawn, the greenette is whipping up and turning around in his bed, pausing the video as he goes. He could have sworn he had heard someone say something right behind him, but when he saw nothing he hesitantly turned back to his computer, heart hammering. Hand hovering over the play button he pauses when something moves in his peripheral vision. Quickly turning on his desk lamp to light up the dark room, Izuku shuts his computer and gets out of his bed. His room isn't very big and there isn't really anywhere to hide except for the small bathroom and closet. So with trembling hands, he whips the closet door open, almost pulling it off the hinges, and breathes a quiet sigh of relief before silently making his way towards the closed bathroom door. Doing the same with his bathroom door, leaving a dent in the drywall, he flicks the lights on and finds nothing. Glancing around nervously he walks back to his room and checks the time. He's been up for almost 67 hours and it was starting to wear on him. Not only has he been avoiding his friend since he had kind of snapped at Kakin, he is also apparently hallucinating now. Great. Anxiously darting his emerald eyes around the room, he climbs back into bed and quietly pulls his knees to his chest with a tense jaw. Eyes wide and hurting, he stares around the empty room, almost as if waiting for something to pop out at him. Heroic's class should be done soon, he just hopes someone comes to find him and tell him they found the guy, so this can all be done and over with. Itsuki grabs a towel from his locker and wipes the sweat from his face and neck. They just finished with Heroic's class, and Kitsuki is trying not to blow one of the extras up behind him. Deku hadn't been in class all day, and he wanted to know what the fuck was going on with the nerd. The hobo had briefly given some excuse about his absence when Round Face asked before continuing class, ignoring everyone's questions, so Kitsuki still knew nothing. He tells himself he isn't worried, but the blonde knows that's a load of shit. After the greenette had sassed back at him after class dinner the other day, which he would normally find amusing if he hadn't been so worried, the shithead had been avoiding him. Not only that, but he looked even worse yesterday during class than he had when Kitsuki confronted him. Now the nerd wasn't in class and, after asking around, no one had heard from him. At least I'm not the only one being avoided. The red-eyed boy thinks with a scoff. Hugging his gauntlets off and setting them on the bench, Kitsuki makes quick work of getting out of his hero costume and getting cleaned up before slipping into his uniform. Storming out of the locker rooms to put his case back in the classroom. After making sure his things were put away, the blonde makes his way back to the dorms before any of his idiots can follow him. He kicks his shoes off at the door and replaces them with slippers before trudging his way up the stairs towards the 4th floor to set his things down and start on homework, but as he is just about to pass the 2nd floor he pauses. A strange feeling worms its way into his stomach as he hesitantly continues past Ikasa's floor. Entering the dark room, Kitsuki flips the light switch and drops his bag on the floor next to his desk before flopping onto his bed with a sigh and lying there for a few moments. That weird feeling is still there, leaving his stomach in knots. He huffs before getting up and making his way back towards the 2nd floor. While he was originally going to give the nerd his space, Kitsuki was sick of this feeling and he wanted answers, so instead he decided to go knock on his door. Standing in the quiet hall, the sounds of his classmates arriving and talking in the common room echoing throughout the building, the blonde waits for an answer but doesn't get one, so he knocks again, louder this time. "Deku? Open up or I'll come in myself." Yelling through the door usually gets the nerd to open up if he's asleep, but when nothing happens, that feeling gets stronger and Kitsuki starts to get nervous. Deciding to give Deku one last chance, Kitsuki knocks one more time before opening the unlocked door. "Nerd, I'm coming in, you better not be changing." He huffs, glancing around the dim room. The sheets are all messed up and his laptop sits shut on the bed. Closing the door behind him blocks the hall light from flowing in, and now the only light in the room is coming from the nerd's desk lamp and the setting sun coming through a crack in his blackout curtains. It's almost eerily quiet in the room and Kitsuki is already turning towards the door to look elsewhere for the greenette when the quietest sound of a sniffle and hitched breath makes its way to the blonde's ear. "Deku? You in here, nerd?" Kitsuki asks softly as he turns towards the bathroom door, only now noticing the light streaming from the crack under it. As he gets closer he can hear the soft sounds of quiet uneven breaths and nudges the door open, eyes widening at the sight before him. Sitting in a small ball, curled up tightly against the farthest corner from the door, was the greenette. Silent tears streamed down his face and a faraway look in his eyes. Red eyes glance down at a sudden movement and he quietly curses when he sees angry red lines being dug in freckled arms. He moves to stop Deku from hurting himself further, but freezes when the boy flinches and watery green eyes look up at him, wide and afraid. "Kakin," he winces at the rough voice. "Kakin, that's you right?" The greenette gasps out before his breath hitches again. He's confused and worried and honestly a little scared seeing his friend like this, but he keeps his voice calm and slowly kneels before the distressed boy. "Yeah, it's me, nerd, it's Kakin." He quietly answers, glancing down at the hands that pause their movement, instead just digging into the skin where they sit. He eyes the red blood sluggishly dripping from the scratches and grimaces before looking back up at the emerald pools staring right back at him. "Izuku, can you let go of your arms for me, you're hurting yourself." He holds his hands out, almost as if in an offer for something else to hold tightly to, and breathes a silent sigh of relief when, after a brief moment of hesitation, scarred fingers release the death grip they had on the greenette's arms. "Kakin, why is it always me?" Red eyes glance up in confusion to see the tears streaming faster than before. Grabbing the freckled boy's hands gently on his own and rubbing a thumb over his knuckles in a comforting motion, he thinks of what any of this means, but comes up with nothing. He came here for answers but only got more questions instead. "What do you mean, nerd?" He almost regrets his questions when a quiet sob escapes the teen in front of him. A forehead comes to rest on his shoulder and he drops one of the hands he was holding to bury his fingers in forest curls. The explosive boy feels completely out of place here. He isn't good with emotions and shit and he sure as hell isn't any good at comforting people. But he is also the only one here and Deku needs him. So he sucks it up and pulls the greenette closer, almost cradling him to his chest as he runs his fingers through thick curls silently, letting him cry it out. "It almost feels like it's always me that this kind of stuff happens to, Kakin. Why couldn't it have been anyone else, why me? I'm so tired, Kakin. I'm so fucking tired and I can't fall asleep. I'm going to die like this, aren't I?" He continues to sob and mumble into Kitsuki's shirt, words slurring, while Kitsuki's brain tries to catch up with what is being said. "Hey, Deku, listen to me, listen, I don't know what the fuck is going on, but you aren't going to die. Calm down, try to breathe for me, okay? Can you do that?" Large hands cup freckled cheeks and he makes the nerd look at him. He can't be completely sure yet, but from the words he was able to make out, it sounds like Deku might have been hit with a quirk or something and he can't sleep. Shit, how long has this been going on for if he's gotten to this point, and why the fuck has nothing been done about it? Instead of getting angry like he wants to, Kitsuki wipes some of the tears falling from Emerald Eyes and leans their foreheads together, breathing even deep breaths for Deku to copy. After about 30 minutes, when the tired teen is finally breathing normally again and calm enough, Kitsuki pulls back a little, wiping away a stray tear with his thumb. "Will you let me clean and wrap your arms?" he asks quietly, not wanting to break the silence, but needing to make sure the nerd was okay with him doing that. The greenette looks confused for a moment before glancing down at his arms, mouth forming a small O in realization before he looks back up and gives a small nod. The taller teen huffs before grabbing the first aid kit he knows is under the sink and turning back to the other. He hands the kit to his friend, ignoring the frankly adorable head tilt he gets, and picks the smaller teen up. Laughing at the small squeak he gets, Kitsuki heads back into the bedroom and sets the greenette on the bed. Pulling up the desk chair and motioning for one of the scratched up arms, the blonde silently goes through the familiar motions of cleaning and bandaging a wound with a pensive look on his face. "I'm sorry." Looking up in surprise, red meets green. "I've been avoiding you and everyone else because I didn't know how to tell you guys what's been going on. I didn't want to worry anyone, but it seems like I failed at that, huh?" The greenette gives a small self-deprecating smile. Kitsuki opens his mouth to say what, he isn't sure. Maybe that the greenette is stupid for apologizing, but really, he doesn't think now is the time for that. Everyone had been worried and he wished that his friend would have gone to someone sooner. He says as much. "It's fine, nerd, I just wish you would have told someone what was going on sooner. We could have tried to get you help before this happened." He gestures weakly to the bandaged arms gently resting in his hands. "Please tell me what's going on, Deku, you scared the shit out of me back there." He murmurs before looking back up into pretty emerald eyes. They stare silently at each other for a moment before Deku sighs and gives a small nod as he scoots towards the head of his bed. Kitsuki follows suit, sitting next to the greenette and letting him lean against his side. "As always says I've been hit with a quirk that's keeping me from sleeping. I hadn't realized it was that at first, which is why I didn't tell anyone until he found me awake last night in the common room." Kitsuki listens as the freckled boy tells him all that he knows, watching him progressively get more nervous as he pulls and twists at his fingers. He reaches out a hand and lets him fiddle with his larger fingers so he doesn't end up hurting his fragile ones. "But yeah, they said they would let me know the moment they find anything, which was this morning." Deku finishes and Kitsuki nods, everything making sense now. "And I ask why you were so freaked out when I found you?" He would understand if it was just because of his lack of sleep that his emotions were all out of whack, but when he had found him, the greenette had seemed too distressed and scared for that to be the case. The sight draws his attention and he turns his head to see Deku staring at the wall with a tired frown. "Since it's been so long since I've last slept, I think I'm starting to get hallucinations. They aren't bad, not necessarily, just movement in the corner of my eyes or hearing things. Even a couple of times where I think I feel something touch me. I guess I finally cracked a bit after that." Kitsuki hums, squeezing the hand that rests in his gently. "Is there anything I can do to help?" He has to ask because he doesn't know himself. He hadn't ever seen the nerd like this before, even back when they were in middle school. The hand in his gives a squeeze back before Deku leans closer to him. "Can you stay and just keep holding me, please? It helps. When you're here I feel like I know what's real, but being alone I..." The blonde cuts him off, not needing an explanation. "Not when he sounds so small and vulnerable like this. I get it, I'll stay. However long you need me, I'll be here." The explosive teen promises quietly, pulling his friend closer to his side as they both lay to get more comfortable. Izuku sighs in content. Even if he's still exhausted, this is probably the most comfortable and relaxed he's been all week. Haken had stayed just like he promised, only leaving for a moment to grab them both some dinner when Izuku's stomach had growled and he sheepishly admitted to not eating much in the past day. Now they both lay in his bed watching an old rerun from an all-night show they used to love when they were younger on his laptop. Snuggling closer to the warm body next to him he lets his eyes slip closed, resting them from being open for so long. The arms around him give a small comforting squeeze before Kaken returns one of his hands to his green curls, combing through and gently detangling the small knots out. "Hey Kaken, do you remember when we used to have those sleepovers all the time?" Izuku whispers, not wanting to break the peaceful quiet surrounding them. With his head resting on the blonde's chest, he hears the quiet rumbling as Kaken laughs quietly. "God, we were little gremlins back then, weren't we? We would stay up so late watching shows like this thinking we were being sneaky and shit, but really we weren't." Izuku smiles fondly at the memory. Back before they had gotten quirks, or in Izuku's case, didn't it felt like they were always at each other's houses, spending all their time together. They used to build these blanket forts and then hide in them at night to watch all of the new All Might shows that would come out even if they were supposed to be sleeping. I remember when Auntie would catch us and start yelling, acting mad even if she had a smile on her face. Those were some of my favorite nights, you know. His words slur together slightly as he tilts his head to rest his chin on the chest beneath him, looking up into ruby eyes with a soft tired smile. Yeah, mine too. The small smile he gets in return makes his face heat up. The blonde continues to brush his curls out of his face, sometimes snagging on a small knot before gently working his way through and continuing. It kind of reminds me of now. Years later and we're still staying up late into the night watching the same all-night show from when we were younger. He yawns through his sentence, covering his mouth with a hand as small tears prick at the corner of his eyes. When he looks back up at the soft look on the blonde's face, he can't help but blush a little. The hand in his hair pauses before moving to cup his face, Kakin running his thumb across his dark circles and along the freckles on his cheek as they stare at each other. Neither was willing to break the quiet tension that had built. Izuku feels the blonde's breath fan across his face, and he only now realizes how close they seem to have gotten, face burning at the small distance between the two. The show was long forgotten and moved to the side as background noise. Glancing between his two red eyes that probably match the same shade of his face, he nervously wets his lips, almost letting out an embarrassing whine when that intense gaze flicks to his lips before going back up to his eyes. Their noses brush together as Izuku shifts slightly, sitting up so that he's leaning more up against the blonde. The arm around his waist pulls him closer until he's practically lying on top of the other teen. Sliding one of his hands that had been resting on the blonde's chest up to the nape of his neck, Izuku flicks his eyes down to the pink lips so close to his own. With a shaky breath, he leans in slightly, leaving only centimeters between the two. Glancing up into Kakin's ruby eyes quickly to make sure it's okay to be this close, he sees the other staring at his own lips with wanting eyes. Gulping slightly at the intense gaze, he looks back down with lidded eyes, resting his forehead against the other's. Just as he starts to close that small distance, the tension that had been building suddenly snaps in the form of a knock on his door. With a yelp, Izuku jumps back only to fall off the bed onto his ass. He grumbles as Kakin starts laughing at him. Ignoring the cackling blonde, he glances at the clock with a burning face, who could be knocking at his door at almost 12 in the morning. Shut up, Kakin. He huffs with puffed up cheeks, pouting at the blonde on his bed. His blonde spikes are messy from lying down, and his cheeks are flushed a pretty pink as he quietly laughs, trying to calm down after cracking up so hard at the greenette's misfortune. Sorry. He chuckles, voice raspy from the late hour, making Izuku's blush flame up again at the sound. God, he's unfairly attractive, the greenette thinks before promptly shoving that thought away with a quiet squeak, getting a raised eyebrow and a smirk sent his way. Another knock interrupts any other unwanted thoughts from making an appearance, and he gives the blonde a confused glance, only getting a shrug in return, before he's getting to his feet and heading over to his bedroom door, all the while trying to calm his racing heart. Upon opening his door and letting the hall light flood into the dimly lit room, he sees the tall frame of his sensei standing there, hand raised as if to knock again. He blinks in surprise before opening the door further. Oh, sensei. What are you doing here so late, did you need something? He asks quietly, not wanting to wake his neighbors and carefully ignoring the fact that he and Kakin had been being loud ever since he fell off the bed. When he catches his teacher's gaze on his bandaged arms, he quickly hides them behind his back while glancing to the side quickly. Midoriya, his sensei, glances behind the greenette into the room before continuing, Bakugo. He nods in greeting, and Izuku hears Kakin shuffling around behind him before he feels the blonde place a hand on his back, out of view of their teacher but still comforting, as the blonde grunts in greeting. Clearing his throat, his teacher thankfully doesn't say anything about the obviously new wounds. He also ignores the fact they are breaking curfew rules by both being in his room this late and instead continues on with why he was at his door so late. I'm sure you would like to know, Midoriya, that we found the guy and he is in custody at the police station as we speak. He lets out a small gasp at the news, looking up at his teacher with wide eyes. Already? You only started looking for him this morning, or I guess it would be yesterday morning now, he mumbles the last part, elbowing Kakin when the blonde snorts. Yes, well, he was already in the system for other charges against him, so we didn't have to look very long on that front. After that, all we had to do was track him down and bring him in, which Nezu was able to handle well enough. That makes sense now that he thought about it. So did you guys figure out his quirk and how to deactivate it? Kakin asks from behind him and he nods along, wanting to know the same. That's why I'm here to get you, Midoriya. While he's being interrogated, the detective asked me to bring you over so the second they get him to talk we can work on deactivating the quirk. Based on his past arrests, the police already had a small file on him, so I'll give you a quick rundown of what we know on the way to the station. His sensei drones on before motioning for him to get ready, which he does. Grabbing his shoes and phone, he's about to walk out before Kakin throws a jacket at him, his face heating up slightly when he realizes it's the blonde's jacket that he had been wearing when he came earlier. The greenette glances hesitantly between the blonde and his teacher waiting in the hall. He wants to ask Kakin to come with him, he's honestly a bit nervous and would like his friend there for moral support, but it's already so late and he knows his friend is probably tired. Before he can come to a decision, however, it seems the blonde read his mind and started grabbing his own things to get ready. "I'm coming with you." Looking back with wide eyes, Izuku is left stunned. "But Kakin, it's already late and you probably want to go to bed." "You don't have to," he's cut off when the taller of the two glares at him before walking to the open door, crossing his arms as he gives him an "are you coming" look with a raised brow. He huffs, knowing there's no fighting when the older team gets like this. Walking over toward his door, he lets it close behind him as he follows his sensei out of the dorms towards the parking lot, Kakin sticking close to his side as they walk in silence. Hopefully by this time tomorrow, he'll actually be able to sleep and he'll be able to get back to his regular schedule. With that thought in mind, he happily leans closer to the blonde in search of warmth, the cold full air nipping at his exposed skin as relief and hope flood through his body. He lays his head against the cool glass of the car window, watching everything blur by. As Awa had told him and Kakin all they knew about the stranger whose name is apparently Watanabe Arata. He sounded pretty normal considering what he had done to Izuku, and he wasn't sure how to feel anymore. When Izawa first showed up at his door and told him the news, he felt hopeful if not a little nervous. Now he felt really nervous after the rundown he got, and he was trying to stay as hopeful as he had been earlier. 15 minutes earlier. As Izuku climbs into the back seats with Kakin and Mr. Izawa starts up the car, he can't help but wring his hands nervously in his lap. They were on their way to the police station where Tsukauchi was probably interrogating the man who had used their quirk on him, so of course he was a bit anxious, but could anyone blame him? Once they start driving and have pulled out of UA, he can't wait any longer, so he opens his mouth, about to ask what they had found about the man, but Izawa beats him to the punch. Tossing a folder into the backseat between the two of them. Green meets red as Izuku glances at the explosive blonde, only getting a raised eyebrow in response to his silent question of who would be the one to grab the folder. With a quiet huff, the greenette grabbed the folder and leaned toward the middle so Kakin could see what was there as well. "There isn't much like I said, but we were able to figure out parts of his quirk based on his past arrests like I mentioned. It's a kind of mutation quirk that has to do with sleep, but in all his past arrests, he had refused to offer up really any details on his quirk. All we know is that he needs to make eye contact to activate it on someone and that it keeps a person from sleeping at all after a full 24 hours from being hit full of nightmare-plagued sleep." Izuku nods along with that as he reads through the man's profile. It's not much, basically just descriptions of his appearance and past crimes. Also the small description of what he's told them about his quirk. Does it mention anything about how to deactivate it? The greenette teen hears his friend ask next to his ear and glances up only for his face to heat up slightly at the short distance between the two of them. Quickly looking back down at the file in his hands to try and hide his red face, he soon notices that, no, it doesn't say anything about a deactivation. Shaking his head, he looks back up towards the front seat where his sensei is focused on the road. "It definitely sounds like what happened to me, but it doesn't mention anything about how to get rid of it, sensei. Is that what they are interrogating him about at the station?" The dark eyes of his sensei glance back at him through the rearview mirror before flicking back to the road in front of them as he gets a small nod. "Yes, among other things," he states ominously, and Izuku shares a glance with Kakin. He puts his hand over his mouth in an attempt to hide his amused smile when he sees the look on the blonde's face. All scrunched as if he had eaten something sour when in reality he was just confused and annoyed at the response they had gotten. Whatever the fuck that means. He hears the teen next to him murmur under his breath and attempts to cover up his laugh with a cough, but knows he has failed when the blonde shoots him a smirk. He looks back down at the file but doesn't find much more information, so he closes it and hands it to the blonde in case he wants to see. They continue talking quietly, his words constantly being interrupted by his yawning before he decides to just rest his head against the window to think about what might happen when they arrive. He hadn't gotten as much information as he would have liked on the man, only his name and a small description of his quirk along with other small details that he wasn't worried about, like his age. He had looked at the reasons for his past arrests, but they were all just petty crimes like pickpocketing or a more interesting one of threatening a civilian with quirk usage and getting caught when a bystander called the police. He didn't seem like much to Izuku if he was being honest, just your everyday criminal. So he didn't understand why he had been hit with this man's quirk. Was it purely just because he was there at the same time as that man, or was it a targeted attack? He didn't know what to think if it was targeted. Why would some small-time criminal that he's never met before be targeting him? Unless someone had hired him. But who would have done that? The League. That didn't make a whole lot of sense to him, they were a big-time villain group, so why would they hire someone like Watanabe? Unless they had planned to attack him while he was still under the effects of this quirk. That would mean they know what this quirk does to people, and that Izuku is in no fighting condition. A shiver runs through his body at the thought of the League personally attacking him. It hasn't happened since Shigaraki found him in the mall during his first year, and that was purely by coincidence. He knows that he's a target for them, especially after everything that's happened, but he hadn't thought that they would try to get to him while he's basically incapacitated. Sure, he'd put up as much of a fight as he could if they tried anything, but he hadn't slept in so long he was starting to have a hard time walking straight, and he was definitely having a hard time forming sentences and thoughts during some conversations, so he wasn't too sure how a fight like that would turn out. He's getting ahead of himself, this is all a big if right now. He has no clear idea as to why he was hit with this quirk and who was responsible for it other than the man who is currently in custody at this very moment. With a shaky breath, he tries to calm his racing heart, having not even noticed he'd gotten so worked up over a bunch of theories. A hand lands on his shoulder and he looks to his side to see concerned red eyes staring at him. "Hey nerd, you've been staring out that window for like 20 minutes. We've been here for about 3 and I've been trying to get your attention, but you seem pretty lost in thought." There's a silent question in the blonde's eyes, but Izuku just nods and unbuckles before sliding out of the car and rounding over to stand next to his sensei, who was waiting at the hood of the vehicle. He hears the door close and the taller teen walks up next to him before they all head into the police station as a group. When they walk in and his sensei gestures to the waiting seats before heading over to the reception desk, Izuku doesn't fight it and just stumbles his way over to the seats before slumping down into the hard plastic, Kaken doing the same next to him. "You okay nerd?" He's not surprised the blonde knew something was up. They've known each other their whole lives, and he can't seem to get anything past the blonde. Covering up a yawn with his hand, he lets his head flop onto the blonde's shoulder as he gives a small hum. "Yeah, just overthinking is all." He eyes Kaken's hand that's fiddling with a thread on his pants and briefly thinks that maybe he should have worn pants instead of his basketball shorts when the chill in the air makes him shiver again, pulling the hoodie he's wearing tighter around his frame. "Thought maybe there was a reason that man hit me with his quirk and my mind kind of just went down a rabbit hole after that." He doesn't have to say his suspicions about the League. The blonde knows they haven't been targeted by any other villain group as obsessively as the League, so of course he'd be wary that they were up to something. And the blonde confirms his thoughts with just one question. "Do you think the League is behind this?" He gives the blonde another hum, his eyes drooping as he thinks up an answer. "It's either that or this all just happened by coincidence. That I just happened to be in the same place at the wrong time and got hit with his quirk." The blonde seems to think his words over, rolling the thought around in his head that maybe the League really was behind this. Before either of them can continue the conversation, however, Aizawa walks up to them and tells them both to follow him. They get led to the observation room, watching through the one-sided mirror as the cat-headed officer Tamakawa and Detective Tsukauchi sit across from that man Izuku had run into only 5 days ago now. They seem to not be getting much information out of the man, with every question they ask they get a half-assed answer that doesn't reveal anything they don't already know. The three watch for another couple of minutes before the officers in the interrogation room seem to give up for the time being and both head to the door. Aizawa steps forward to greet the detective when they exit the door, Tamakawa continues walking, probably on his way to deal with his other work. Aizawa, great timing. I'm glad you all were able to make it here so late." The detective seems exhausted as he continues to talk with Aizawa quietly, seemingly filling him in on anything he may have missed. While they talk, Izuku takes the time to look back at the criminal through the glass. He seemed a bit nervous based on the fidgeting, but Izuku couldn't really blame the guy. He was just arrested and God knows Izuku himself would be sweating bullets and probably staving off a panic attack if he were in that situation. Really though, he just looked like a normal guy to the greenette, just like he had thought back at that convenience store. Sure, he had acted strange, but he wasn't doing anything suspicious based on what Izuku could remember, now though he was sitting, cuffed to a table, in a police station. It goes to show him that really anyone could have ill intentions and end up here just like this guy, no matter how normal they seem. "Midoriya, if you're comfortable with it, then we would like for you to sit in with us while we continue the interrogation and see if Watanabe would be more willing if he saw who he had affected." The sound of Mr. Aizawa's voice breaks him from his thoughts and he glances over to where the detective and his teacher are standing, closer to the door that leads into the small square room. He thinks about it for a second, wondering if he had the energy to face that man and try to pull answers from him. The answer would be, no, he has zero energy and he'd honestly prefer to be curled up in bed, but what could he do, really? Who is he kidding? The decision was clear the second his sensei had asked. So with a determined look in his eye, he gives the two adults a sharp nod before following the two into the room. At the sound of the door opening, the man cuffed to the table looks up with a bored expression only for his eyes to widen slightly at the sight of Izuku. Nervously glancing towards his sensei to try and gauge any kind of reaction he might have had at the criminal, Izuku takes a seat next to the detective, across from the criminal as Izawa pulls up a third on the other side of Izuku. Shifting in his seat awkwardly as silence overtakes the room while Tsukauchi opens his notebook and the file he has on the man sitting in front of them, he wrings his hands nervously in his lap out of sight. Watanabe is staring at him with a small frown on his face, his dark red eyes flicking over his tired features before looking away completely and staring down at the metal table. "Alright Mr. Watanabe, we are going to try this again." The detective to his left starts as he sets down his pen and stares at the criminal in front of them. To start with, I will go over my quirk again and we will continue from there. As I've said before, my quirk is called True Man and it is a lie detection quirk, so please refrain from telling any lies as my quirk will pick up on it and you will have to answer once again truthfully. The greenette watches the criminal closely, wondering if he had been lying before he arrived and maybe that's why Tsukauchi repeated how his quirk works. Or maybe Izuku is just thinking too much into things and that's just standard protocol. Now, as you can see, I've brought some new people in with me. I would like you to tell me if you recognize this boy here sitting next to me. Izuku watches as the man's eyes flick back towards him before he returns his glare to the detective once again. "Yeah, I've seen the kid before." The man's voice is gruff when he speaks, a scowl on his face as he stares down the detective next to Izuku. And you are aware that you have used your quirk illegally on him, no?" The detective asks and Izuku holds back a flinch when the criminal's sharp eyes snap back over to him. He watches as the man studies him once again, eyes lingering on his own, probably noticing the puffiness and the dark bags under his eyes. He almost thinks that he won't answer the question when his silence drags on for an awkward moment, but then those sharp burgundy eyes return to the detective waiting for an answer. "Yeah, I used my quirk on him." He's surprised the man is answering the questions with little to no resistance when he had been under the impression that this criminal was stubborn and not very forthcoming. "How does your quirk work? We know the basics based on what you've already told us, but how do you deactivate it?" His sensei speaks up this time and Izuku perks at the question. He would like to know that as well. It was the reason he had come so quickly after all. He watches as the man's jaw snaps shut, seemingly refusing to speak, and he can't help but deflate at his silence. Izuku looks down at his hands resting in his lap, wringing them together in an almost painful manner. When he had gotten the news that they found the person who had hit him with the quirk, he had been so hopeful that maybe the person had done it accidentally and would help deactivate it. When he found out they were a criminal, he'd been a bit more wary but still optimistic that he would be able to sleep by the time he got back to the dorms. Now though he isn't so sure and it scares him a bit. The thought that he might not be able to sleep again and he'll end up dying like this. Another yawn forces itself out of him, his hand automatically coming up to cover his mouth as his jaw pops. He grimaces as he rubs at his cheek before looking back up as the detective continues with his questions, it being obvious the man won't answer this one yet. "Alright, how about this, tell me, was he targeted specifically by you or was this purely just by chance that you managed to hit a hero student with your quirk?" The man's eyes widen slightly and he stares at Izuku, making the teen squirm in his seat under his gaze. "I didn't know the kid was a hero student." "True, so did you merely happen to think you were using it on a stranger or did you target him specifically?" He asks again while Izuku nervously glances around the room, trying to avoid the criminal's eyes. "It wasn't an accident. Someone approached me and said if I hit the kid with my quirk, then my debt with them would be repaid. Figured it was a good deal. That way I'd be able to be free from those freaks and also be able to get some sleep while the quirk was doing its thing." Confusion washed over the other three in the room. If someone had approached him then this went a lot deeper than just a simple quirk accident, but Izuku was still stuck on his words. What was that about getting sleep? Maybe another aspect of his quirk that they didn't know about. "Can you describe what the person looked like or tell us why they would be targeting my student in the first place?" His sensei spoke up once again. Watanabe eyed the underground hero for a moment before letting out a sigh. "An underground broker was the one to approach me first. Said he had a deal that I would be interested in and all I had to do was use my quirk on someone. Led me to some kind of bar and we ended up meeting with the leader of that freak villain group." The greenette's stomach twists at the mention of a villain group and a broker. It sounded suspiciously like the League and the broker who is known for working with them quite a bit, Jiren. All he could do was hope and pray that his gut was wrong and it was someone different. Considering his luck though that might not be the case. He shares a glance with his teacher and knows by the look in his eyes that he's thinking the same thing. "Do you know the names of any of these people or can you describe what they looked like?" "Not the broker, no, all I know is he looked like a smug bastard, only caring about his money." Wore a purple suit and had silver hair, always smoking a cigar or something. The guy he took me to I knew. Got mixed up with him and his group back before they all started rampaging and talking about taking down Hero Society. The guy's name was Shigaraki. I'm sure you've heard of him. Blue hair and cracked skin, crazy, always carrying around those hands. His heart drops when he hears his suspicions come true. Of course, Shigaraki was behind this, why wouldn't he be? He feels his teacher just barely tense next to him, going unnoticed by anyone else. Looking up with wide eyes at Izawa, he sees the man's gaze already on him and feels comforted by the protective look in his dark eyes. Alright, thank you for answering. We'll go further into that later, for now, we need to know about your quirk and for you to deactivate it. The detective states, looking like he's about to start asking more questions when Watanabe interrupts. I can't deactivate it. It's those 4 words that make Izuku think his heart might have stopped. It seems to take the other two by surprise as they both widen their eyes, Izawa less so, but the greenette can still see the shock written on his face. What do you mean you can't deactivate it? It's the first time he speaks up, everyone turning to look at him when they hear the mumbled question. He stares back with a blank look, his face almost emotionless if it weren't for the pleading look in his eyes that he can't mask. Everyone seems to falter slightly, the criminal staring at him with an unreadable look. I mean that after I activate my quirk on someone, I can't deactivate it. You would have to wait for the effects to wear off. He almost lets himself panic at those words. He has to wait longer. But before he does, Izawa asks a question and he lets that small bit of hope climb back up his chest. How long does it last then? When will the effects wear off? He makes a good point, for all Izuku knows, this quirk could wear off in an hour and he'd be able to sleep again. The opposite is still true though, that it could be days before that happens, so he doesn't let himself hope too much. It lasts 7 days. After the first 24 hours, I can't do anything to try and deactivate it. It's like the words echo around in his head, eyes dulling and staring at nothing as everything starts to sound muffled. It was Thursday morning so he still had almost another 4 days of this hell. Would he be able to make it? He had thought he was already at his limit for what he could handle of this quirk, but now he has to make it for another 4 days. It's been almost 80 hours which sounds so unbelievable to Izuku that anyone would be able to function with that little sleep, let alone that it's him that it's happening to. He felt so desperate for sleep, he was tired of the constant headaches and yawning, tired of the aching pressure behind his eyes and the heaviness he felt all over his body, tired of feeling like he could keel over at any moment, but knowing he wouldn't be able to get any sleep, he was just tired overall, and he was almost tempted to get someone to knock him out of his misery. He thinks a few punches to the face might do it with how exhausted he feels. All he knows right now is that he's so tired he would do anything, even if it meant he'd sleep forever. His brain doesn't even register the fact that his thoughts are headed into dangerous territory, all he can think about is finding a way to get some sleep sooner than those 4 days. Different ideas run through his mind, some that he throws out immediately and some he thinks he might try. One of those thoughts is something he could try now. He opens his mouth completely ignoring the 2 adults who were trying to get him to respond as he turns to Izawa. An almost crazed glint in his watery eyes when he snaps his attention to the hero in desperation, the gruff man leaning back a bit in shock. Erase his quirk sensei, surely I'll be able to sleep after his quirk is erased. Somewhere in his mind, he knows that it doesn't actually make sense and it won't work. The criminal isn't actively using his quirk on Izuku, he's just dealing with the after effects of it from back when he had used it, so there isn't anything for him to erase. He also ignores the fact that the man across from him is in quirk suppressant cuffs, so he can't even use it right now even if he tried. That doesn't mean he gives up when all he gets is a hesitant look. Please sensei, erase his quirk. At least try, please. I need to know if it'll work. I need to sleep sensei. Please just try, even if it doesn't work then we'll know and I can just find another way. He knows he sounds desperate and whiny, but he is desperate. Anything that might be able to get him to sleep, he'll try it. With a sigh, his sensei puts a hand on his shoulder and gives him a small nod. Alright problem child, just try to relax and try not to get your hopes up, it might not work. He sits back in his seat with a sharp nod, shoulders slumping in relief. His eyes burn with his unshed tears as his sensei prepares to erase the man's quirk. He knows subconsciously that it won't work, but that doesn't mean he doesn't feel at least a little devastated when he's proven right. Everything seems to blur together after that. He doesn't remember what was said or when he was escorted from the room. He just lets himself float in the back of his mind, not knowing what else he could possibly do to try and fix the situation. Itsuki wasn't sure what to think. When the hobo and detective went into the interrogation room with Deku, all he had been expecting was for the shithead to answer their questions and release Deku from this shitty quirk. What was only 15 minutes felt like an eternity when the nerd was finally let out of the room, completely unresponsive and just staring at nothing with distant eyes. He had tried to get him to say something or even just acknowledge the blonde, but all he got was that blank stare. Now they were sitting in his sensei's car, waiting at a red light while they were driven back to UA. The trip hadn't taken that long overall. From the time they left to now it had only been about an hour and a half, and they would probably get back to the dorms right around 2 in the morning. Looking to his left he saw the greenette staring blankly out the window with his head resting on the palm of his hand before looking back out his own window with furrowed brows. He felt completely useless. He didn't know how he could help his friend when he was like this, and it pissed him the fuck off. He felt almost as useless as earlier when he had first found Deku in his bathroom, but at least then he was able to help. Now he was at a complete loss. When they finally got back to the dorms, Kitsuki silently led the greenette back to his room. He had let the hobo know he was staying with Deku, and he could fight with him about it later if he really had a problem with it. Luckily all he got was a small nod from his sensei telling him he could skip classes tomorrow and in order to take care of the nerd, as if he wasn't already planning on doing that. Luckily they were both already in fairly comfortable clothes, so all Kitsuki did was try and get the nerd comfortable in his bed before laying down next to him, a book that had been lying on the nerd's desk in his hand. He still hadn't gotten any kind of response from the greenette, so he was just going to read for the both of them until he either passed out or Deku said something. Taking the bookmark out and setting it to the side, Kitsuki sets in for a long night. His red eyes are drooping and his words slurring together by the time there's any kind of movement beside him. He quickly puts the bookmark back where he found it and sets the book back on the desk before looking over to see Deku's tired emerald eyes staring back at him. "Hey, nerd, you back with me?" His voice is almost a whisper as he reaches out to gently run his hand through those forest-like curls. He hears a quiet hum come from the greenette, watching with a sad sort of fondness as he leans into his hand almost like a cat. Green eyes finally take in the surroundings of Deku's bedroom, widening slightly before landing back on Kitsuki. "When did we get to my room?" His words slur together as he asks the question. In any other situation he probably would have teased the nerd, but now wasn't the time, not when he could so obviously tell that his friend was struggling and needed his support. "About an hour ago. After we left the station you weren't responding to anyone, so I wanted to make sure you were okay and stayed up here when we got back." He could see the confusion in those green eyes, frowning at him before deciding they could talk more when the sun was up. "Come on, nerd, I know you can't sleep, so just try to get comfortable, I'll be right here." He murmurs as he scoots further down the bed until his head hits the pillows and he can lay comfortably. Deku continues to sit up for another moment as he looks at Kitsuki before giving a slow nod and laying back down, laying his head on the blonde's chest. He hopes the greenette can't hear the way his heart speeds up a bit at the action or feel the heat radiating from his cheeks when he pulls him closer, almost as if hugging him. Truth be told, he's had a crush on Deku since the end of first year, so now he has trouble acting normal. Especially after they had almost kissed just a few hours ago. God, does it feel like a lot longer than that with everything that has happened. He's had no time to even think about that, let alone the thought that Deku might like him back. He knows it's selfish to want anything more with the greenette after everything, so he has tried to keep his feelings locked away. Even so, laying here, like this with Deku, running his fingers through thick curls as he feels the warm, even breath of the other hit his neck, he lets himself be a little selfish when he leaves the smallest of kisses on the crown of the nerd's head before falling into a peaceful sleep. Green eyes trace the outline of Kaken's face in the moonlight as he listens to the soft breaths coming from the sleeping teen next to him. He looks peaceful like this, without any worries to bother him while he sleeps, and the almost constant furrow between his brows is now smoothed out. He hadn't been able to fall asleep, just like he had expected, and had been left to sit with his thoughts in the silence. At first, he had started to spiral into those dark thoughts from the police station that he vaguely remembers, but he had quickly tried to distract himself with anything other than those, and his mind just so happened to land on the blonde next to him. He had thought he felt Kaken kiss his head before falling asleep, but he couldn't be too sure. And as he lays here now he lets his gaze linger on the blonde's slightly parted lips, thinking back to earlier that night when he had almost kissed them. He wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion clouding his judgment, but he had been almost completely sure that the blonde was going to kiss him back. He's liked Kaken for as long as he could remember. It hadn't started out romantic, at first he just admired his explosive friend, and by the time he was in middle school, he knew he had feelings for him, but they faded for a while after all the bullying, thinking he'd never get his friend to reciprocate those feelings. At the start of first year, he had thought that maybe he would finally get over the blonde when he had met Ichako. She had been his first friend there and was always so kind to him, so of course he had gotten a small crush on her. But the longer he got to know her the more he realized that he didn't see her like that anymore, she was more like a sister to him than anything, and he knew she felt the same way. His feelings for Kakin hadn't gone away completely, he still admired him and he knew in the back of his mind that he still loved him too, so when the blonde started treating him better and their friendship got better he fell all over again. Of course, he didn't say anything, he didn't want to ruin his friendship that he had just gotten back so he left it at that. Just loving him from afar and staying his friend. It was hard keeping his feelings a secret, especially when at the start of second year their conversations and interactions became more flirty. He had thought that was just the blonde's way of showing he was more comfortable around Izuku and was a sign of their friendship growing, but after their almost kiss he couldn't be so sure. He just hoped that maybe he did have a chance after all. That's it for today guys, hope you enjoyed this, if you did then please make sure to leave a like, share and do check it out author of this fanfic. Take care. Thanks for watching.